Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. I appreciate you being here with me today. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I'm assuming the birds are chirping and the sky is wonderful and blue. It's probably about 60 degrees out because it's Ohio in the winter. This is probably perfect. But anyway, I'm Pastor Chris, and I'm the XP here at Mosaic. Here's a couple of announcements before we get started. Number 1, Witness 1-8. If you would love to give to our year-end campaign funding this project, we would love for you to do so, and we appreciate you being willing to. Today's the last day for it to count towards our year-end, but if you would like to do so, you can still give to this throughout the next year. Number 2, we're starting our new sermon series, You in 5 Years. It kicks off this coming week, both Thursday and Sunday. And finally, our yearly fast starts off on the 7th. We look forward to praying with you and spending time with you. But okay, here we go. I want to start by giving you a gift today. I like giving gifts. Presents are fun. It's kind of Christmassy, right? But before I give you this gift, I need you to make a promise to me. I have a specific way I'd like for you to spend it. It's a precious, finite resource, and there's only so many things we can do with it, but there's one thing I think would be really worthwhile this week. So here's the gift I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you some time. You see, normally a sermon at Mosaic is about 35, 40 minutes, and my goal today is to keep this to about 20. I want it to be 20 at most. Hear that, Jonathan? 20 at most. No more. If you don't mind, I don't care if you even have to do something silly like cut me off in the middle of a sentence. Just 20. We're keeping it at 20, okay? Anyway, back to you. I want to give you this gift of time. And I think you're going to enjoy it, but there's one specific thing I want you to spend it on. All right, you ready? I want you today to rest. I'm betting you didn't like that one, did you? No one likes to think about taking a resource like time and using it to rest. If we're given something like that, something precious, why are we going to spend it not doing things? But rest is vitally important. It is hugely important. Rest is one of the first blessings that we received as people from our Creator. Think about that, guys. God created the world. In the beginning of Genesis, we see God creating the world. We see him making the heavens and the earth. We see him forming the earth from this void nothingness. We see him creating plants and animals and heavenly bodies and the sun and the moon and stars, and he's actually just building all of creation. And then he makes people, and then he rests. You see, I never think of it this way because we think of God resting on the 7th day of creation, but we got to enjoy that day of creation with him, that day of rest with him. Our first full day in existence was spent on rest. That's pretty cool, right? Literally the first thing we did for a full day was rest. Man. Now God takes rest seriously. He really finds it important. In fact, it says it's one of the things that he hands to people that he loves. There's a psalm that actually says 2 things, and it's probably the only time where I'm like, I don't know, there might be a contradiction in the Bible. But this psalm says 2 things simultaneously. The first one it says is, the Lord grants sleep to those he loves. And then like 2 sentences later, he says, blessed is the man who has numerous kids. Blessed is the person who has so many sons that it's like he has a quiver full of them. And if you're a parent, you know that sleep and kids don't go together. Fun little study just got talks this out. There was a 2019 study by Oxford and the Sleep Research Society. And this study pointed out that on average, it takes 6 years after someone has their first kid for them to return to their sleep habits that they had before they had kids. That's on average, by the way. So for all of you whose kid decided to start sleeping through the night whenever they were a year old or less and who got to start sleeping until 9 right away, There's me, who we're 10 years in and I'm still down like 4 hours of sleep a day. But God loves me and he grants me sleep, and I know that's true. God takes rest seriously, and he wants us to take it seriously too. Do you want to know how seriously he takes it? The concept of Sabbath is mentioned roughly 170 times in the Old Testament and almost 70 in the New. And Sabbath literally just means day of rest. It's so important to God that it's like if he had a top 10 list of things that were important to him, it would be like number 4 on that list. Yeah, remember the Sabbath day is the 4th commandment, guys. You want to know how much he values rest? I want to tell you about one of my favorite types of rest described in the Old Testament. It's found in Leviticus, right around chapter 25, and it's called the Year of Jubilee. You see, God calls for people to rest on the 7th day in memory of whenever he rested on the 7th day of creation. And he doesn't just call for us to rest on a weekly basis. He also outlined for the people of Israel these Sabbaths of years. And so every 7 years, they were supposed to let the land rest, and they were allowed to allow their farms to go fallow, and for all of this important stuff to happen, then they were supposed to actually just spend that year letting the land rest. And then there's this concept of a Sabbath of Sabbaths. This is the year of Jubilee. This time where every 7 Sabbath years, so every 49 or 50 years, depending on how it's counted, the people of Israel were supposed to undergo a year of Jubilee or a year of the Lord's favor. And they were supposed to rest, and not just rest the land, but they were supposed to use this as a time of restoration. People who were in slavery were restored to freedom. People who had sold off land that they were given by God, it was restored to them. People who were in debt, that debt was released. And people were to spend that year with those freed burdens resting. God takes rest seriously. Rest is hugely important to him, and I think I know why. And that's because, well, it boils down to this. Rest is trust. Now, why might that be important to God? Why might it be important for us to remember that rest is trust? Well, think about this. You see, we got to that 7th day of creation, and we got to spend a full day resting with God. And then, like, the next story we hear about in Genesis is us breaking the world by our disobedience and failure. We sin enters the world, and the world is broken because of us. And we sometimes think of the first sin as things like eating a piece of fruit. But yeah, that's the action. But that wasn't actually the first part of sin. You see, the first sin was failure to trust what God said. God said very specifically, don't eat the fruit from this tree. And Satan brings out this, is that really what he said or what he meant? And we didn't trust that what God said was what he said. And because of our lack of trust, we ignored what he said. We ate that fruit, and we broke the world. Pretty great idea on our part. We destroyed the world by our lack of trust. And because of that, our relationship with the world changed. Work is now toil. It's hard. Things are hard in general, and rest now requires trust. Think about those Sabbath years. God's saying, trust me. I've got you. Stop working. Just stop. Man, think about that even on a weekly basis throughout the year. Think about this. In Exodus 34:21, God says this, on 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. In plowing time and in harvest you shall rest. God doesn't just want us to rest whenever it is convenient for us or whenever it is easy. He calls for us to rest even when we're in the midst of our hardest works or our most important works. And doing that requires that we trust God, because if we don't trust him, that means we're going to try and do all of that work ourselves. We're going to say, you know what, even though I'm supposed to rest, I'm going to go ahead and just do all of this stuff and try and do everything else because God says I should rest and trust him to bring in the harvest, but if I don't do it, it's not going to happen. Man, in our busiest times, we're supposed to rest, but rest isn't something we normally do. You know, I made a joke earlier about us living in the age of technological marvels. Think about this. There was a study done in 2008. A person named Valerie Ramey did estimates of the time spent by all people in a household on managing the household. That's the cleaning, the cooking, the repairing things, the doing the outside work, all of that. And she combined how much people in a household put into that. And then she compared that in 1900 to how people spend time working on their households today, 2005. It's not quite today, but close enough relatively. And she found that on average, whenever you include the work of everyone in the household, people are spending basically the same amount of time managing their households now as they did in 1900. And what that means is this. All that time saved on things like power tools and dishwashers and vacuum cleaners and all of the random saving devices on things for management that we have, like, oh my goodness, electric stoves, microwaves, even things like to-do lists and apps that remind us to do stuff. All this technology that we have that should be making our lives easier and making us work less, all we've done is shifted what we're spending time on. We've done a little bit of shifting of who's spending time too, by the way. So women used to spend far more time in household chores, and now they still do spend more time than men generally do, but men do more than they did in 1900. So hey, progress. But even with that, the same amount of hours are spent. You see, we gain time through these labor-saving practices, and we use that time to do more work. We're bad at rest, guys. We do this horribly. We bear heavy burdens. We carry unwieldy weights. We take on too much. We toil ceaselessly. And why? Because we don't trust that things will be okay unless we put in all of the effort on it. That year of Jubilee we talked about earlier, that Sabbath of Sabbaths, that year of rests that's apart from all year of rests where everything is restored and we're supposed to just breathe easily. Throughout all of Old Testament history and all of New Testament history and all of written history that we have beyond the Old and New Testaments, we don't have a single example of the year of Jubilee ever being practiced in the way the people of Israel were called to practice it in Leviticus. Not once. The people never trusted God enough to follow through with that. We really don't believe that if we stop laboring, that God will take care of us, and that will be okay. But here's some good news, everyone. You see, we're wrong. See, Jesus shows us and tells us that we're wrong. Think about this. In the book of Luke, in chapter 4, towards the end of it, we see Jesus doing something that he does regularly. He steps into a synagogue in his hometown of Galilee, and he begins to teach. I'm going to read that section of scripture real quick. It goes like this. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and the recovery of sight from the blind, to set the oppressed free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor," the year of Jubilee. Then he rolled up the scroll, he gave it back to the attendant, and he sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Good news, everybody. We are wrong. Jesus proclaimed with his coming that he is bringing a return of rest. Perfect rest. I mean, think about this. Jesus talked about this concept a decent amount. Let's just quote one other place. In Matthew 11, Jesus says this, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus calls for us to give up our burdens, the things that we toil on, our labors, our attempts to perfect ourselves, and to hand them to him and to take what he offers on ourselves. That's what he calls for us to do. Why? What enables us to do that? What enables us to actually take these worries and these fears and these things that keep us from resting, these anxieties that make us work like our life depends on it? What enables us to give them over to him? Well, Peter answers that one actually in 1 Peter. In 1 Peter 5:7, he says this, "Cast all your anxiety on him, Jesus, because he cares for you." Why can we hand our anxieties over to Jesus and rest? Because he loves us. And because he loves us, we can trust him. I mean, think about it, guys. He's shown it so many times. Think about all the times he has given you exactly what you need, right when you needed it. He does it. I want you to think about this too, though. Our rest is also a testimony to the world around us and to the fact that we trust God. Hebrews 4 says this, "There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their own works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter into that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience." Now, are you proclaiming by how you live, by how you rest, that you trust God? Are you doing it? Parents, I'm going to call you out specifically here because we do a bad job of this, right? Think about this. I want you to stop and consider this. Consider the way you build your schedule for the coming year. Consider the way in which you fill your time. Consider the rhythms of life that you are building into your family right now and the ones that will dictate how your life goes for the next decade or two. In those rhythms, are you enabling your children to rest? Are you teaching them to trust? Because if you aren't modeling rest, you aren't teaching your kids to trust God. I told you earlier that I want you to rest. Here's what I want you to do. Are you ready? This is going to sound crazy, but here it goes. If you can, I want you to take a nap. Crazy, right? Take a nap. You have 20-ish minutes now. Go lay down and sleep. Rick Warren says this in my favorite way. He says, sometimes the most godly thing or the most righteous thing a person can do is take a nap. And I think that is really true. If you can, position yourself somewhere where you can possibly see outside, or where you can see something that just isn't the most crazy thing in the world. If you're like me, if you're staring at a mess, it's hard to rest. So I don't know, if you need to, turn and face a wall, okay? Whatever. I just want you to take a moment and be quiet. Take a moment and breathe. Pause and pray and thank God for the fact that you know you can trust him. Now, I'd like to end this with a blessing. I want to bless you as you go. So may the peace of Jesus fill you now as you step into this time of rest. May you remember to trust him and rest in him today. And may you remember to carry this rest over into the coming year. All right, that's it. That's all I've got. Guys, have a lovely Sunday. I miss you. I I can't wait to see you again. And have a great recording now. Recording now. Woo! Welcome, jokey intro. Jonathan, we're on to take 2 of this sermon because I'm dumb and I didn't have my sound on that whole first take. So, we get to have a little fun, do this a second time. I'm sure it'll go exactly as well as the first time. But that means you probably don't have audio of me accidentally swearing.